Biodiversity. Why is biodiversity important? Biodiversity's benefit to society include contributions to medicine and agriculture and the provision of ecosystems, goods, and services. Biological diversity, or biodiversity, is the total of all the genetically based variations in all the organisms in the biosphere. Biodiversity is one of Earth's greatest natural resources. When biodiversity is lost, significant value to the biosphere and to humanity may be lost along with it. Biodiversity exists on three levels: ecosystem diversity, species diversity, and genetic diversity. Ecosystem diversity refers to the variety of habitats, communities, and ecological processes in the biosphere. The number of different species in the biosphere, or in any particular area, is called species diversity. Biologists have identified and named more than 1.8 million species, and they estimate that at least 30 million more are yet to be discovered, most of which are insects. Genetic diversity can refer to the sum total of all different forms of genetic information carried by a particular species or by all organisms on Earth. Within each species, genetic diversity refers to the total of all the different forms of genes present in that species. Wild species are the original source of many medicines. For example, foxglove plant contains compounds called digitellins that are used to treat heart disease. These plant compounds are assembled according to instructions coded in their genes. The genetic information carried by diverse species is like a natural library from which we have a great deal to learn. Most crop plants have wild relatives. For example, wild potatoes in South America come in many colors and varieties. These wild plants may carry genes we can combine through plant breeding or genetic engineering to transfer resistance to disease or pests. The number and variety of species in an ecosystem can influence that ecosystem's stability, productivity, and value to humans. Sometimes the presence or absence of a single keystone species, like the sea otter, can completely change the nature of life in an ecosystem. When the otter population falls, the population of its favorite prey, sea urchins, goes up. Population increase in sea urchins cause a dramatic decrease in the population of sea kelp, the sea urchin's favorite food. Also, healthy and diverse ecosystems play a vital role in maintaining soil, water, and air quality. What are the most significant threats to biodiversity? Humans. Humans reduce biodiversity by altering habitats, hunting, introducing invasive species, and releasing pollutants into food webs, into the lithosphere, the atmosphere, and the hydrosphere. Human activity today is causing an increase in extinctions. The current rate of species loss is approaching 1,000 times the rate without humans. As species disappear, we lose the potential contribution to human knowledge that is carried in their genes. Species diversity is related to genetic diversity. The more genetically diverse a species is, the greater its chances of surviving disturbances. So as human activity reduces genetic diversity, species are put at a greater risk for extinction. Species diversity is also linked to ecosystem diversity. As ecosystems are damaged, the organisms that inhabit them become more vulnerable to extinction. Humans reduce biodiversity by altering habitats, hunting, introducing invasive species, and releasing pollution into food webs. When natural habitats are eliminated for agriculture or for urban development, the number of species in those habitats drops, and some species may become extinct. Development often splits ecosystems into pieces, a process called habitat fragmentation, which are habitat islands. A biological island can be any patch of habitat surrounded by a different habitat. For example, deforestation for housing developments in Florida has led to forest islands. The smaller a habitat island, the fewer the species that can live there and the smaller their populations. Both changes make habitats and species more vulnerable to other disturbances. Humans can push species to extinction by hunting. Some animals are hunted for meat and for their valuable hides or skins. Green parrots are hunted, then sold as pets. Hunted species are affected even more than other species by habitat fragmentation because fragmentation increases access for hunters and limits available hiding spaces for prey. The Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species CITES bans international trade in products from a list of endangered species. Organisms introduced to new habitats can become invasive and threaten biodiversity. One European weed, leafy spurge, infested millions of hectares across northern Great Plains. Leafy spurge displaced grasses and other food plants, and it can sicken or kill cows and horses. Many pollutants threaten biodiversity. DDT, for example, prevents birds from laying healthy eggs. Acid rain stresses land and water organisms. Increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is dissolving in the oceans, making them more acidic, which threatens biodiversity in marine ecosystems. Organisms are adapted to their environments and have specific tolerance ranges to temperature and abiotic conditions. If conditions change beyond an organism's tolerance, the organism must move to a more suitable location or face extinction. Species in fragmented habitats, such as those forest islands in Florida, are particularly vulnerable to temperature change because they may not be able to move easily to a suitable habitat. How do we preserve biodiversity? To conserve biodiversity, we must protect individual species, preserve habitats and ecosystems, and make certain that human neighbors of protected areas benefit from participating in conservation efforts. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums, AZA, oversees species survival plans, SSPs, designed to protect threatened or endangered species. In the AZA captive breeding program, mating pairs of animals are carefully selected to ensure maximum genetic diversity. The ultimate goal of an SSP is to reintroduce individuals to the wild. More than 180 species are currently covered by SSPs. Global conservation efforts today strive to protect not just individual species, but entire ecosystems. The goal is to preserve the natural interactions of many species. Governments and conservation groups work to set aside land as parks and reserves. The United States has national parks, forests, and other protected areas. Marine sanctuaries are being created to protect coral reefs and marine mammals. To make sure that conservation efforts are concentrated in the most important places, conservation biologists have identified ecological hotspots. An ecological hotspot is a place where significant numbers of species and habitats are in immediate danger of extinction. By identifying these areas, ecologists hope that scientists and governments can better target their efforts to save as many species as possible. These are the hotspots that are currently labeled around the world. Ecologists refer to human impact in the biosphere using a concept called ecological footprint. The ecological footprint describes the total area of functioning land and water ecosystems needed both to provide the resources an individual or population uses and to absorb the waste that the individual or population generates. Calculating actual numbers for ecological footprints is difficult and complicated. There are no universal accepted ways to calculate the footprint size. In addition, footprints give only a snapshot of the situation in a particular point of time. Although calculating absolute footprints is difficult, ecological footprints can be useful for making comparisons among populations. The per person use of resources in America is almost twice that of England, more than twice that of Japan, and almost 6 times that of China. as shown in the map in the following slide. Ecological footprints take into account the need to provide resources such as energy, food, water, and shelter, and to absorb such waste as sewage and greenhouse gases. Ecologists use footprint calculations to estimate the biosphere's carrying capacity for humans. Ecological deficit. The greatest deficit, the US, Japan, England. Others have less. Likely because of affluence, America has been able to curb ecological damage while continuing to grow. The next slide shows the successful efforts of some countries to reduce the energy consumption during growth, increasing GDP at the same time. A 30-year trend arrow pointing to the upper left means progress in energy efficiency. Pointing to the upper right is detrimental to the environment. So the 30-year trend is the US, Germany, Ukraine, but China goes the other direction. How can ecology guide us toward a sustainable future? Number one, by recognizing problems in the environment, researching that problem to determine its cause, and then, number three, using scientific understanding to change our behavior, we can have a positive impact on the global environment. The future of the biosphere depends on the ecological footprints, global population growth, and technological development. Ecological research, properly collected, analyzed, and applied, can help us make decisions that will produce profoundly positive effects on the human condition. Between 20 and 50 kilometers above Earth's surface, the atmosphere contains a relatively high concentration of ozone, which is O3, called the ozone layer. Ozone at ground level is a pollutant, but the natural ozone layer absorbs harmful ultraviolet rays from the sunlight. By absorbing UV light, the ozone layer serves as global sunscreen. Beginning in the 1970s, satellite data reveals that ozone concentrations over the Antarctica has dropped during the southern winter. An area of lower ozone concentration is commonly called an ozone hole. In 1974, a research team demonstrated that gases called chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, could damage the ozone layer. CFCs were once widely used in propellants, in aerosol cans, as coolants in refrigerators, freezers, and air conditioners, and in the production of plastic foams. Once the research on CFCs was published and accepted by the scientific community, the rest was up to policymakers. Following recommendations of the ozone researchers, 191 countries signed a major agreement, the Montreal Protocol, which banned most uses of CFCs. The atmospheric concentration of ozone-destroying halogens from 1992 has been decreasing. Ozone-destroying halogens from CFCs have been steadily decreasing since about 1994, and this is evidence that the CFC ban has had positive long-term effects. Current data predict that although the ozone hole will continue to fluctuate in size from year to year, it should disappear for good around the middle of the century. From 1950 to 1997, the annual world seafood catch grew from 19 million tons to more than 90 million tons. Recent dramatic declines in commercial fish populations have proved that the fish supply is not an endless, renewable resource. From the 1950s through the 1970s, large boats and high-tech fish finding equipment made the fishing effort both more intense and more efficient. Catches rose for a time, but then began falling and continued to fall despite the most intense fishing effort in history. The total mass of cod caught has decreased significantly since the 1980s because the sharp decrease in cod biomass in the ocean. So the amount of biomass, how much cod there are, and how much catch there has been. So they have caught less because there is less. Fishery ecologists gather data, including age, structure, and growth rates. Analysis of these data showed that fish populations were shrinking. Ecologists determined that the recent declines in fish catches were the result of overfishing. Fish were being caught faster than they could be replaced by reproduction. The U.S. National Marine Fisheries Service created guidelines for commercial fishing. The guidelines specified how many fish and of what size could be caught in U.S. waters. In 1996, the Sustainable Fisheries Act closed certain areas to fishing until stocks were recovered. Other areas are closed seasonally to allow fish to breed and spawn. The U.S. National Marine Fisheries Services created guidelines for commercial fishing. The guidelines specified how many fish and of what size to be caught in U.S. waters. In 1996, the Sustainable Fisheries Act closed certain areas of fishing until stocks recovered. Aquaculture, the farming of aquatic animals, offers good alternative to commercial fishing with limited environmental damage if properly managed. Overall, progress in restoring fish populations has been slow. Huge fleets from other countries continue to fish the ocean waters outside the U.S. territories. Some countries are reluctant to accept conservation efforts because regulations that protect fish populations for future, they cause job and income losses today. The challenge is to come up with sustainable practices that ensure long-term health for fisheries with minimal short-term impact on the fishing industry.